Why did the commander's voice echo louder than the steel walls themselves when he saw her kneeling beside the rifle? It wasn't supposed to be dramatic. Just another morning inside the armory, just another inspection. But when Commander Rick Morrison stepped through the doorway and saw a woman in faded coveralls methodically cleaning a Barrett .50 caliber rifle, something primal flared in him. Territorial, protective, angry. He didn't see precision. He didn't see calm. He saw intrusion. Step away from the weapon. The words came out sharp, rehearsed by years of command. Around him, 50 SEALs froze. The room fell into that rare silence where everyone senses something is about to break. The woman didn't flinch. Her hands kept moving, slow, exact, like she wasn't just cleaning steel but remembering it. Madison Parker didn't look dangerous. That was the problem. She looked small, quiet, almost invisible, the kind of person people walk past without registering. And yet, the rifle beneath her hands was stripped down with a care that bordered on reverence. When she finally looked up, her eyes weren't apologetic. They weren't defiant either. They were tired. She explained calmly that she had been assigned to routine maintenance. She even held out the paperwork. Morrison didn't read it. He didn't need to. In his world, authority wasn't proven with forms. It was enforced with presence. Someone laughed. Someone else made a joke. Madison went back to work. That was when she made her first mistake, or maybe her first truth slipped out. She commented almost casually on the rifle's wear pattern, on the modified trigger, on the estimated round count. The laughter stopped. You could hear it in the room, that subtle shift when trained men realize someone knows more than they expected, when curiosity replaces mockery. Morrison felt it too, and he hated it. He ordered her escorted out. She didn't argue, she didn't raise her voice. She just asked politely if she could finish the task, because unfinished maintenance led to failures later, and failures cost lives. That word landed heavier than anyone expected. Then the Master Chief spoke. Pat Kelly had seen enough wars to recognize the shape of experience. It wasn't in how fast she worked. It was in how she moved when challenged. No wasted motion, no nervous energy, no need to prove anything. Kelly suggested a test. Madison hesitated. That hesitation wasn't fear, it was calculation. She accepted. Blindfolded. 5 minutes. As her hands dismantled the rifle with surgical certainty, something uncomfortable spread through the room. The realization that they weren't watching a trick, they were watching muscle memory built under pressure. When she finished early, no one clapped, no one joked. Morrison tried to regain control by questioning her background. She answered carefully, truthfully but selectively. And that restraint said more than confidence ever could. Because some people don't lie to hide. They lie to protect what remembering costs them. What none of them knew yet was that this was only the beginning of what they were about to uncover, and the quiet storm she had been trying to outrun. Why did her hands never shake when they handed her a sniper rifle? The range smelled like salt and oil. The ocean stretched out behind the targets, endless and indifferent. At 800 meters, the target was barely visible, a suggestion more than a shape. Madison lay prone without ceremony, no theatrics, no speeches. She didn't ask for wind data, she didn't ask for time. She just breathed. For the first time that morning, her thoughts went quiet. This was familiar, too familiar. The rifle rested against her shoulder like an old memory she had tried to forget. She adjusted the bipod by feel alone, settled in, let her heart rate fall. The first shot landed clean. So did the second. By the third, no one was breathing. Morrison stared at the screen as if the numbers were lying to him. Perfect center, again. The fourth shot grouped so tightly it overlapped the third. And then she did something no one expected. She moved away from the scope. Iron sights. At that distance, it bordered on absurd. At that distance, even luck wouldn't save you. The shot broke softly. Perfect. Silence swallowed the range. Madison stood and cleared the weapon like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Maybe she had, maybe far more. Kelly didn't congratulate her. He asked the only question that mattered. Have you ever fired a rifle in anger? The pause that followed wasn't dramatic, it was heavy. Madison's answer was careful, vague, enough to confirm without confessing. And that was when Morrison realized the mistake he'd made. Not tactical, personal. He hadn't just underestimated her skill. He had dismissed her humanity. Because beneath the precision was something fractured, something carrying weight no metal could balance. And as base security began digging into records that shouldn't have existed or should have remained buried, the truth began to surface. Officially, Madison Parker had died 3 years earlier. Killed in action. Afghanistan. The room went cold. Why does someone who's supposed to be dead choose to clean weapons instead of carrying one? The file wasn't meant to be opened. Even the base commander hesitated before pulling it up. Clearances stacked on clearances, names redacted, locations erased. Angel of Death. 47 confirmed kills. Longest recorded sniper engagement, 3,347 meters. Sole survivor. Madison hadn't hidden because she was dangerous. She'd hidden because surviving was heavier than dying. She'd lost her team, her anchor, the only people who understood the cost of the work, and when they were gone, she didn't know who she was without the mission. So she chose maintenance. Fixing instead of breaking, preserving instead of ending. But trauma doesn't disappear when you change uniforms. It waits. And when Morrison found her sitting alone on the lighthouse ledge, staring into the Pacific, he finally understood the silence behind her eyes. She wasn't contemplating escape. She was remembering. The commander apologized, not as an officer, as a man who finally recognized the cost of assumptions. Madison didn't absolve him. She didn't condemn him either. She just told the truth. Some people don't retire from who they were trained to be. They just try to live quietly around it. Then the helicopter came. No flight plan, no markings that mattered. The past doesn't knock. It lands. Why does redemption always arrive disguised as another sacrifice? The CIA liaison didn't ask if she was ready. He assumed. Madison handed Morrison a letter, not insurance, closure. Inside was the truth about a mission that never officially happened, about a betrayal that cost 6 lives, about why surviving felt like theft. She boarded the helicopter without looking back. Weeks later, the liaison was dead, officially natural causes. Madison vanished again. But the letter did what bullets never could. It exposed rot quietly, patiently. Morrison kept the final encrypted message she sent. The truth survives even when its carriers don't. He understood then. Strength isn't loud. Resilience doesn't announce itself. And dignity doesn't beg to be seen. Sometimes it kneels in the corner of a room, cleaning a weapon no one believes it knows how to use. Until it acts. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the room feel smaller the moment she accepted the rifle, as if every wall had leaned inward to listen? Madison Parker didn't rush to the firing line. That alone unsettled them. Most people moved fast when eyes were on them, when judgment hovered in the air like a held breath. She didn't. She walked with the same unremarkable pace she'd used while mopping floors, as if nothing about this moment mattered, as if 50 elite operators watching her wasn't enough to speed her pulse. But inside something tightened. Not fear, not excitement. Recognition. The range opened up before her, long and exposed, the Pacific glinting behind the targets. Wind brushed her face, light but inconsistent. She noted it automatically, then hated herself for doing so. Muscle memory didn't ask permission. It simply woke up. She laid the rifle down gently, fingers brushing the stock with a familiarity she hadn't felt in years. That was the first crack, the first betrayal of the life she had been trying to live. Maintenance worker, quiet, invisible, a person with no past worth examining. The rifle didn't care about that lie. It remembered her. As she adjusted the bipod, Madison felt the familiar ache in her wrists, not injury but history, the ache of repetition, of hours spent prone in dirt that smelled like burned metal and blood. She forced herself to breathe slowly, counting the way she'd been taught long ago, not to steady her hands, to steady her thoughts. Don't go there. She told herself that, told herself this was just a test, just a demonstration. She could make it ordinary if she wanted. 4 hits out of 5, nothing special, enough to satisfy them, enough to retreat back into obscurity. But the problem with pretending to be smaller than you are is that it costs something every time. And she was tired of paying. Behind her, Commander Morrison stood rigid, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He was already framing the outcome in his mind. If she failed, it would justify everything. His instincts, his authority, his anger. Failure would restore order. Master Chief Kelly saw something else. He watched her shoulders, the angle of her neck, the way she aligned herself with the rifle without conscious adjustment. He'd seen that posture before, in people who didn't think about shooting anymore because shooting had become thinking. Jake Torres felt it too, a sense of unease he couldn't name. It wasn't intimidation, it was dissonance. This woman didn't match the moment, and moments like this always revealed truth. Madison chambered the first round. The sound snapped something loose in her chest. For half a second she wasn't on Coronado. She was somewhere dry and distant, heat shimmering off rock, her team spread out behind her. She pushed the image down hard, forced her eyes back into the scope. Target distance, wind. Nothing else. The first shot broke clean. The recoil felt like a handshake from an old enemy, familiar, unforgiving, honest. Hit. She didn't smile, didn't react. She cycled the bolt smoothly, her body already resetting itself. No celebration, no relief. Because relief came later, or never. The second shot followed with the same quiet authority. Another hit. Murmurs started behind her, but they sounded far away. Madison's world had narrowed, the way it always did when she focused. Tunnel vision wasn't a flaw, it was a gift. It let her exist without the weight of memory. By the third shot, she felt it, that dangerous calm. The one she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. The one that made everything simple, clean, binary. Target or not. Live or dead. The third impact hit dead center. Perfect. She exhaled slowly, longer than necessary. Her fingers tightened for just a moment, and she hated that they felt so sure of themselves, hated that this still felt like home. Behind her, someone whispered something she couldn't hear. It didn't matter. She waited before the fourth shot, let the wind settle, let herself feel the weight of the choice she was making. She could still dial it back, still miss once, still protect the fragile life she'd built out of anonymity and silence. But then she remembered scrubbing carbon residue off barrels at 3 in the morning, alone in empty rooms. Remembered how fixing weapons felt safer than trusting herself to live without purpose. The fourth shot landed almost on top of the third. Another perfect score. Madison closed her eyes briefly. This was the moment, the pivot, the line she wasn't supposed to cross. She made the decision without thinking about it, which was exactly how all her worst and best decisions had ever been made. She lifted her head slightly and shifted her grip. The scope moved out of alignment. Iron sights. A ripple went through the observers. Confusion, disbelief. Jake Torres felt his stomach drop. Even he knew what that meant, or what it shouldn't mean. At this distance, iron sights weren't brave. They were pointless. Unless you knew something they didn't. Madison's breathing slowed further. Each inhale measured, each exhale controlled. She wasn't thinking about the SEALs anymore, or the commander, or the consequences. She was thinking about the last time she'd taken a shot like this. About the voice in her ear that had trusted her without question. About the team that never made it home. The shot broke. The echo faded into the ocean wind. Perfect. For a long moment, no one spoke. Madison cleared the weapon and stood, her movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. The calm that followed was worse than the tension before. She could feel eyes on her now, not dismissive, not mocking. Reverent. That scared her more than contempt ever had. She turned, finally facing them. 50 men who had trained their entire lives for moments like this. Men who now looked at her like they were reassessing a map they thought they knew. Morrison's face had drained of color. His authority, so loud earlier, now felt fragile. He searched for words that wouldn't come. Kelly stepped forward slowly, respectfully. "I've seen shooters my whole career," he said. "What you just did, that's not something you learn by accident." Madison nodded once, not agreement, acknowledgement. "Is the test concluded, sir?" she asked quietly. Her voice didn't carry pride or defiance, it carried fatigue. As she began cleaning the rifle, as if this were just another task on a checklist, Jake Torres noticed something that made his skin prickle. Her hands weren't shaking. Not from adrenaline, not from triumph, not from fear. They were steady because this hadn't mattered to her the way it mattered to them. And that realization unsettled him more than the shooting ever could. Because people who treat moments like this as routine usually earned that right somewhere no one wants to talk about. Kelly asked where she learned to shoot like that. She didn't answer. Morrison demanded to know who she really was. She told him exactly what her paperwork said. And in that space between what was said and what was clearly true, suspicion bloomed. Madison felt it shifting, the air, the posture, the assumptions hardening into something sharper. She recognized this pattern too, the moment when admiration turns into threat perception. She lived through it before. That was when she knew staying silent wasn't protecting her anymore. It was painting a target. When Morrison mentioned security, mentioned investigations, something cold settled in her chest. Not fear, resignation. The kind that comes when you realize the past doesn't stay buried just because you stop digging. She straightened slightly, posture changing just enough to be noticed by those who knew what to look for. "Commander," she said calmly, "what you're interpreting as suspicious isn't deception. It's privacy." The word hung there. Privacy. A luxury most warriors never get. Kelly suggested a background check. Madison didn't argue, because part of her already knew how this would end. Some ghosts don't stay quiet forever. And as the systems began digging into records that shouldn't have existed, Madison felt the old weight return, the one she tried to trade for mops and toolkits and silence. She had wanted a small life. But small lives don't always survive big truths. And somewhere deep inside, the part of her that had never learned how to stop being what she was began to stir again, not eager, not proud, but awake. Because sometimes, being underestimated isn't an insult. It's a warning. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who's broken is remind them exactly who they used to be. Why did the computer hesitate before responding, as if even the system wasn't sure it was allowed to remember her? The secure room smelled different from the armory. Less oil, more ozone. Screens hummed softly, encrypted lines blinking like guarded eyes. Madison Parker wasn't there, but her presence lingered anyway in the stunned silence, in the way no one quite met anyone else's gaze. Commander Morrison stood rigid behind Master Chief Kelly as the first background query ran. He told himself this was procedural, necessary. He told himself he was doing his job. But the truth sat heavier. He had felt threatened, not by danger, by being wrong. The initial file appeared clean. Too clean. Maintenance contractor, 8 months, clearance valid, no flags, no criminal history. It was the kind of record that soothed concerns, that closed questions. Kelly didn't relax. He leaned closer to the screen, eyes narrowing. He'd seen this before, not often, but enough to recognize the shape of it. Lives that had been sanded smooth by bureaucracy, past simplified to avoid sharp edges. "Dig deeper," Kelly said quietly. The technician hesitated. "Master Chief, that requires." "I know what it requires." The cursor blinked. Then the screen changed. Access DNID. Classification level insufficient. The room went still. Jake Torres felt a slow chill crawl up his spine. Civilian contractors didn't trigger responses like that. Not ever. He looked at Morrison, expecting anger or satisfaction. What he saw instead was something closer to dread. Kelly tried another database, then another. Each denial came faster than the last, like doors slamming shut before they could even knock. Finally, one line appeared. Subject status, deceased. KIA Afghanistan, 2021. No details, no context. Just finality. For a moment, no one spoke. "She's supposed to be dead," Morrison said finally, his voice low, stripped of command. Kelly nodded slowly. "Which means either the system is wrong, or we've been sharing a base with someone who legally no longer exists." Jake swallowed. He replayed the range in his mind. The calm, the precision, the way she hadn't reacted like someone proving herself. More like someone reliving something. Before anyone could speak again, the door opened. Captain Anderson didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Gentlemen," he said, "you stumbled into something far above your clearance." The room straightened instinctively. Anderson entered codes no one else in the room had ever seen. The screen flickered, then resolved. This time the file didn't look clean. It looked scarred. Angel of Death. Special Activities Division. Status, retired/deceased operationally. Confirmed engagements scrolled past faster than Jake could process. Locations redacted. Dates scattered across a decade of conflict. One line stood out, burning itself into every mind in the room. Longest confirmed sniper engagement, 3,347 meters. Morrison felt physically ill. "That's her," Anderson said quietly, "or who she used to be." Kelly closed his eyes for a brief moment. 47 confirmed kills, probably more unconfirmed. That kind of number didn't come from recklessness. It came from patience, from restraint, from a willingness to wait longer than anyone else. "And the team?" Kelly asked. Anderson's jaw tightened. "Operation Nightfall, classified, compromised, everyone else died." Silence swallowed the room. Jake exhaled slowly. He thought about how she'd handled the rifle afterward, cleaning it, grounding herself, not celebrating, not even lingering. "She didn't want to be seen," he said quietly. "No," Anderson replied. "She wanted to disappear." Morrison ran a hand down his face. "We threatened to call security on her." "And you forced her to pick up a weapon again," Anderson said, not unkindly. "For someone with her history, that's not nothing." The weight of it settled in Morrison's chest. He hadn't just been wrong. He'd reopened wounds that had never healed. "She chose maintenance," Anderson continued, "because fixing things felt safer than breaking them, because cleaning weapons didn't require her to decide who deserved to die." Kelly nodded slowly. He'd seen that instinct before, warriors trying to make peace with hands trained for violence. She won't come quietly, Morrison said. Not because she's dangerous, because she's tired. As if summoned by the thought, a report crackled over the radio. Unidentified individual spotted on lighthouse observation deck. Been there several hours. Morrison didn't hesitate. I'll handle it. The lighthouse stairs echoed under his boots, each step heavier than the last. He rehearsed words in his head and discarded them just as quickly. Apologies felt inadequate. Explanations felt hollow. When he reached the top, Madison was sitting on the edge, legs dangling, ocean stretching endlessly below. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the water gold and blood red. She didn't turn when he spoke her name. I know, she said quietly. That was all. Morrison stopped a respectful distance away. I owe you an apology. She nodded slightly. I know. He struggled for words that wouldn't sound like excuses. We ran your background. I figured you would. You're supposed to be dead. That's what they needed at the time. Her voice carried no bitterness, just fact. They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the wind. Morrison finally spoke again. Why maintenance? Madison stared at the horizon. Because broken things still deserve care, and because weapons don't scream when you clean them. The honesty in that answer hurt. My team died 3 years ago, she continued, unprompted. After that, every decision felt like theft. Breathing, sleeping, living. I didn't want a life that made sense. I wanted one that was small enough not to hurt anyone. Morrison swallowed. You didn't hurt anyone today. She smiled faintly. You don't know that. The sound of rotors cut through the air before he could respond. Madison stiffened just slightly. They found me, she said. A black helicopter approached the base, purposeful, unannounced. Morrison's radio crackled confirmation, CIA liaison, immediate priority. Madison reached into her pocket and handed him an envelope. If I don't come back, she said, mail this. What's in it? He asked. The truth, she replied, about why my team died and why disappearing wasn't cowardice. The helicopter touched down. Morrison felt an urge, irrational, desperate, to tell her to run, to vanish again, to choose herself. But she stood. Some people don't get to retire from what they were, she said softly. They just change how they carry it. She walked toward the stairs, then paused. Take care of your people, she added, and next time someone seems small, look again. He watched her board the helicopter, watched it lift into the darkening sky, carrying a woman the world officially said was already gone. As the rotors faded, Morrison looked down at the envelope in his hands. For the first time in years, he understood something simple and devastating. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, cleans up after itself, and asks only to be left in peace. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is remind a broken soul exactly how powerful it still is. Why did the silence feel louder after the helicopter vanished, as if the sky itself had swallowed something it wasn't meant to return? Commander Morrison stood on the landing pad long after the rotors became a distant echo. The wind off the Pacific tugged at his uniform, sharp and cold, but he barely felt it. In his hands, the envelope Madison had given him felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. Not because of what it might contain, but because of what it represented. Truth uncontained, dangerous. Around him, the seals slowly dispersed, their usual edge dulled by something unfamiliar. Unease. Not fear of an enemy, but of themselves. Of how easily they'd misjudged someone. Of how close they'd come to turning a survivor into a suspect. Morrison didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Madison's hands steady, deliberate, almost gentle as she cleaned the rifle. He heard her voice on the lighthouse deck. Broken but not weak. Exhausted but not defeated. By morning, base security confirmed what Morrison already suspected. Madison Parker no longer existed. Her quarters were untouched. Her maintenance locker was empty. Her vehicle was gone, removed sometime before dawn with clearance no one on base could trace. It was as if she'd been erased mid-sentence. Captain Anderson called an emergency briefing. "What happened yesterday," he said, standing before a closed room of senior personnel, "did not happen." There were no objections. Angel of Death would remain a rumor, a ghost, a classified footnote buried beneath layers of denial. Officially, Madison Parker had never been there. Unofficially, every man in that room knew their understanding of strength had shifted. Still, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. He was right. 3 weeks later, the message arrived. Encrypted, short, untraceable. The truth survives even when its carriers don't. No signature, no explanation. Morrison read it twice, then locked it away with the envelope he still hadn't opened. Something in him resisted. Not fear, respect. Madison had trusted him with that letter. He wasn't ready to break that trust yet. Then the news broke. A CIA liaison officer, the same man who had taken Madison away, was found dead in a Washington hotel room. Heart attack, they said. Natural causes. Morrison stared at the report longer than necessary. Coincidences, he'd learned over years of combat, were just patterns you hadn't recognized yet. That night, he opened the envelope. The letter inside wasn't long. It didn't read like a confession or a manifesto. It read like a goodbye written by someone who had already accepted the cost. Madison wrote about Operation Nightfall, about a compromised chain of command, about a leak that had sent her team into an ambush designed to fail. Names were omitted, but the shape of the betrayal was unmistakable. She wrote about surviving, not as victory, but as punishment. She wrote about learning that silence could be a weapon too. And she wrote one line that Morrison would never forget. "I didn't disappear to escape what I did. I disappeared to keep myself from becoming it again." Morrison sat alone in his office long after dawn, the letter resting open on the desk. For the first time since taking command, he questioned the assumptions that had built his career. The instinct to dominate uncertainty, to treat anomalies as threats instead of warnings. Madison had been both. And she had been right. 6 months passed. Then 9. The base changed in small ways. Morrison made sure of it. Maintenance staff were treated differently. Briefings slowed down. Assumptions were challenged. No one mentioned Madison, but her absence left a mark, a quiet correction in the culture. Jake Torres transferred to sniper training shortly after, not because of ambition, but because he wanted to understand the discipline he'd witnessed. He studied patience, restraint, the ethics of distance. Master Chief Kelly retired a year later. On his last day, he left Morrison with a simple observation. "She wasn't the deadliest person I've ever seen," Kelly said. "She was the most controlled. That's what scared people." Morrison understood. Then one evening, long after Madison should have been nothing more than memory, Morrison received another message. Not encrypted this time. Handwritten. Delivered through channels that didn't leave records. It contained a single sentence. "Some wars don't end when the shooting stops." No return address. No signature. Morrison burned the note after reading it, watching the words curl into ash. He didn't need proof anymore. He knew. Madison was still out there. Not hunting, not hiding. Watching. And maybe, just maybe, choosing what kind of ghost she wanted to be. Because some people carry violence the way others carry grief. Carefully, quietly, with constant effort not to let it spill. And some people don't seek redemption by being seen. They seek it by refusing to be needed again. Morrison stepped outside his office and looked toward the ocean. The horizon stretched thin between light and dark. Somewhere beyond it, Madison Parker, Angel of Death, was living a life that didn't fit into records or ranks or stories meant to be told loudly. A life built on restraint, on silence, on the hard, unglamorous choice to keep going without applause. And Morrison finally understood the lesson she had left behind without ever trying to teach it. Strength isn't proven by how much force you can wield. It's proven by how much you choose not to. Some people don't need monuments. They need peace. Why did the nights grow heavier after she was gone, as if the base itself had learned how to remember? Commander Morrison noticed it first in the quiet hours, the way footsteps echoed longer down empty corridors, the way the armory felt less like a place of readiness and more like a room holding its breath. Nothing tangible had changed, and yet everything had. It was as if Madison Parker had left behind an absence with weight, not a void, but a presence inverted. People worked more carefully now. Weapons were handled with a little more respect. Conversations slowed. Jokes died halfway out of mouths when someone remembered how easily confidence could turn into blindness. No one said her name, but no one needed to. She had become a reference point. The team went on with their missions. Training cycles rotated. Deployments came and went. On paper, it was business as usual. In reality, something subtle had shifted. Morrison began asking different questions in briefings, not just about objectives and extraction routes, but about people, about readiness that couldn't be measured in numbers. Some of the younger operators bristled at first. This wasn't how things were done, but the veterans understood. They'd seen what happens when you mistake toughness for resilience, when you forget that survival leaves marks. Jake Torres felt it the deepest. He found himself thinking about Madison more often than he expected, about the way she'd waited between shots, about the patience it took not to rush perfection. Sniper school challenged him physically, but it was the mental discipline that humbled him. The stillness, the accountability of distance. Every time he lay prone behind a rifle, he remembered her final iron sight shot, not as bravado, but as closure. She hadn't done it to impress them. She'd done it because she needed to know she still could. That realization haunted him. One evening, months after her disappearance, Jake visited the range alone. He set a target at extreme distance, farther than his instructors recommended. The wind was unpredictable, the light fatting. He missed, again and again. Frustration welled up, sharp and embarrassing. Then he remembered something Madison had never said out loud, but had shown them all. Control isn't about hitting every shot. It's about knowing when not to take one. Jake packed up and left before darkness settled. For the first time, walking away felt like progress. Meanwhile, far from Coronado, Madison Parker sat in a quiet place that didn't appear on maps. No fences, no insignia, just a house perched near a stretch of forest where the nights were long and the air smelled like pine and rain. She slept poorly. Some habits don't dissolve just because danger recedes. She still woke before dawn, still mapped exits in unfamiliar rooms, still cataloged sounds without thinking. But here the noise was softer, wind through trees, distant water, no rotors, no radios, no orders. The CIA had given her a choice, one they rarely offered: disappear completely or consult, quietly, selectively, no triggers, no direct action. She chose the latter, because doing nothing felt too much like waiting to die. Consulting let her contribute without crossing the line she'd sworn never to cross again. Pattern analysis, threat assessment, teaching others how not to make the mistakes that had killed her team. Still, every recommendation carried a cost. Each briefing reopened doors she kept sealed. Each satellite image stirred memories she worked hard to bury. Some nights she sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, staring into the dark, listening to the world breathe. She told herself she was healing. But healing wasn't linear. The letter she'd given Morrison had been a gamble, Not for protection, she was beyond that. It was an act of trust, a final attempt to leave truth in responsible hands. When she learned, through channels she no longer officially had, that the liaison officer had died, she felt no satisfaction, only confirmation. The system corrected itself the way it always did. Quietly, permanently. That knowledge didn't bring peace, it brought clarity. She had survived not because she was spared, but because she was needed, whether she wanted to be or not. That realization sat uneasily in her chest. Back at Coronado, Morrison received notice of a policy review triggered by classified disclosures. He wasn't named. Neither was Madison, but the language was unmistakable, oversight tightening, shadows shifting. He thought about the line from her letter, "Silence can be a weapon," and wondered how many wars had been shaped by what wasn't said. One afternoon, Morrison visited the armory alone. He stood where Madison had knelt months earlier. The space looked ordinary now, sterile, empty. He knelt anyway, ran his fingers along the edge of the mat. He imagined what it must have taken for her to choose that life, to trade mastery for anonymity, to accept being overlooked because it hurt less than being known. For the first time, Morrison understood something about leadership that no manual had ever taught him. Authority isn't about command. It's about restraint. And restraint is learned the hard way. Elsewhere, Madison received a request she hadn't expected. A junior analyst struggling with guilt after a drone strike gone wrong. The agency asked if Madison would speak to him, off the record, peer-to-peer. She considered declining. Then she remembered herself at 26, sharp, certain, unaware of how long echoes last. She agreed. They spoke for hours. She didn't give advice. She didn't absolve him. She just listened. Let him talk through the weight. Let him realize he wasn't alone in carrying it. When the call ended, Madison sat in silence, hands clasped, heart heavy but steady. This, she realized, might be the work now. Not erasing violence, but helping others survive having been part of it. Weeks later, another message arrived. Different channel, different urgency. A developing threat pattern, familiar signatures, tactics she knew too well. She stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't her fight anymore. But it was someone's. She wrote her assessment carefully, precisely. She chose words that guided without commanding, warned without provoking. She sent it and shut the system down. Then she went outside. The night was clear, stars sharp, the world indifferent and beautiful. For the first time since Coronado, Madison felt something close to hope, not the naive kind, but the durable kind. The kind that doesn't promise safety, only meaning. Because redemption, she was learning, wasn't about undoing the past. It was about choosing what you carry forward. And sometimes, the bravest thing a warrior can do isn't to fight again. It's to teach others how not to become what nearly destroyed you. Somewhere far away, Morrison stood watch over a sleeping base. Jake Torres prepared for another day of training, and Madison Parker sat beneath a quiet sky, no longer running, but no longer pretending the past didn't matter. The world kept turning, and in its slow, relentless motion, something fragile and honest began to take root. Not peace, but balance. Why did dawn feel heavier than any firefight she'd ever survived, as if the quiet itself was asking something of her? Madison Parker stood at the edge of the forest, the sky slowly lightening through the trees. Morning birds called without urgency. The world was moving forward, indifferent to what she had been, unconcerned with what she still carried. For years, she'd lived inside moments where time collapsed into seconds, where breath and trigger pull decided everything. Now, time stretched, and that, she was learning, could be just as difficult. She wrapped her jacket tighter and closed her eyes. Somewhere far away, men and women she would never meet were preparing for missions shaped, in small, unseen ways, by her words. Not her bullets, her restraint. The thought unsettled her more than any kill ever had. Because this kind of influence couldn't be measured, and it couldn't be undone. The final message arrived later that morning. Not urgent, not dramatic, just a quiet request rooted through layers of anonymity. A review board, internal, high level. They wanted her testimony not in person, not on record, but as a written account. The truth of Operation Nightfall, not to prosecute, not to expose, to understand. Madison stared at the screen for a long time. This was the moment she'd been outrunning without admitting it, the chance or the burden to put words to the thing that had shattered her life, to relive the decisions, the compromises, the silence that followed. She could refuse. She had earned that right. Instead, she sat down. The words came slowly at first, then faster. She wrote about the night air in the mountains, about the radio call that came seconds too late, about realizing in the middle of chaos that the plan they were following no longer belonged to them. She wrote about watching her team die one by one, not heroically, not cinematically, but confused, trusting, doing exactly what they'd been trained to do. She wrote about the moment she chose survival, and how that choice had haunted her more than death ever could. When she finished, hours had passed. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from release. She sent the document and shut the laptop. That chapter, at least, was no longer hers alone. At Coronado, Commander Morrison received notice that the review board had concluded its work. Policies were revised, oversight strengthened, names quietly reassigned, no public reckoning, no headlines. But fewer teams would be sent out blind. That mattered. Morrison walked the base that evening as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across concrete and steel. He paused near the armory, listening to the familiar sounds of maintenance, tools, laughter, routine. He thought about Madison often, though he'd never hear from her again. He didn't need to. Her influence had already done its work. Leadership, he'd learned, wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about knowing when to listen to the quiet ones. Jake Torres felt the shift too. Years later, on his first operational deployment as a sniper, he found himself in a position eerily similar to the story he'd once heard in whispers. Long distance, high stakes, a shot available but uncertain. He waited. Minutes stretched, sweat pooled, muscles screamed. Then the target moved out of sight. The opportunity vanished. When he returned to base, his team asked why he hadn't taken the shot. Jake didn't talk about wind or range or probability. He said simply, it didn't feel right. No one argued. That night, he wrote a message he knew would never be sent, addressed to a woman officially dead. You taught me that patience can save lives, even when it costs pride. Far away, Madison Parker stood in a small community center, listening to a room full of veterans talk about sleep they couldn't find and memories they couldn't silence. She wasn't the most decorated person there. She wasn't even the one speaking the most. She was just present. And that was enough. Sometimes she still dreamed of the rifle, of the weight of it against her shoulder, of the impossible distances she'd once mastered, but the dreams were quieter now, less accusatory, more like echoes fatting down a long corridor. She had stopped trying to outrun them. One evening, as autumn settled in, Madison walked back to her cabin beneath a sky thick with stars. She paused, looking up, and allowed herself a rare smile, small, private, unearned. She was still here, not because she had survived death, but because she had chosen life afterward. Not the life she'd planned, not the one she'd been trained for, but one shaped by intention instead of reaction, by care instead of control. The world would never know her full story. Her longest shot would remain a statistic buried in classified files. Her name would never appear on monuments. And that was all right. because meaning didn't require witnesses. As the night deepened, Madison thought about the young woman she'd once been, desperate to prove herself, convinced that excellence would protect her from loss. She wished she could tell that version of herself one thing: that strength isn't found at the edge of endurance. It's found in knowing when to step back from it. Somewhere, Commander Morrison finished another long day of command. Jake Torres cleaned his rifle with the same quiet respect he once witnessed. And Madison Parker turned off the light in a home that finally felt like shelter. 3 lives, forever altered by a moment that never made the news. 3 quiet trajectories bending toward something gentler. The world would keep demanding violence. It always did. But now, in small, unseen ways, it would also carry restraint. Because sometimes the bravest legacy isn't the battles you win. It's the damage you refuse to pass on. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.